What is something a high school teacher told you that you will never forget? Class camp. We're out walking a trail to the next campsite, carrying our lives in our packs. I was not in great physical shape and was well back in the rear, so it's basically just me and one teacher to make sure no one fell too far back. We came to a part where a branch had fallen across the trail, big enough to be an effort to move it, but not so large that it couldn't have been moved by any of the 30 plus other students and teachers that had already walked around it. Without even thinking about it, I grabbed the branch and tossed it to the side of the path. The teacher said to me, 30 boys walked past that branch. It took one man to move it, and he made life easier for every person after him. It became a personal motto of sorts. Make it easier for the people who come after you. Although, when you do a good job, the person who comes after you is usually also you. Story 2. In my childhood, only one person ever tackled my mother about her abuse of me and my siblings. It was Parents' Day, and my female dog of a mother, as usual, turned up to take credit for my being top of the class again. At one point, there was just me, my female dog of a mother, and Mrs. Soames, the physics teacher, in the lab. Mrs. Soames quite calmly challenged her, saying, "Mrs. Blah Blah Blah, why do you treat Tom's daughter the way you do? She's a good girl and doesn't deserve it." To my astonishment, my evil female dog of a mother was speechless. No one had ever confronted her before, and she just didn't know where to put herself. It was easy for the other teachers and pupils to make snide, patronizing remarks about this cow to me. A 13-year-old girl isn't in a position to do anything about it, and I'm guessing they were trying to ease their consciences about the fact that they were too cowardly to intervene. But Mrs. Soames has been a role model for me ever since, and an unforgettable example of those people brave enough to tackle a bully in the presence of their victim. To have someone stand by you when you're vulnerable and make their support for you clear, I can't tell you how that changed my view of other people. Story 3. On 9/11, while classes were all but canceled, most teachers just rolled in TVs and left the news on. Not Jim R. He got up and lectured, to the groans of students. He talked about the effects this would have on the economy, our politics, our culture, and society. And he was right. In somewhat broad strokes, of course, but this was literally hours after the towers collapsed, when so much was still unknown, frightening, and tragic. It really gave me what I would consider a solid base of understanding the things that would come in the next decade. He talked about how traveling the world would change with restrictive security measures, how politics would take advantage of terrorism, how wars we will engage will be paid for by my generation, my kids' generation, and so on. He talked about how racism will spike towards the Middle Eastern peoples out of anger and fear, and how that's totally wrong. As a vet and former cop, he cautioned us to not join the military while emotions ran high and a sense of patriotism was thick in our veins. It was a gift. As the years went on, WMDs, the Iraq War, TSA, Department of Homeland Security all came about. I felt like I already knew. I will never forget that fourth period class. Story 4. Called me out of English my senior year to chat in the hall just to, quote, check on me and how I was doing. I had planned to head to the girls' room after that class with a purse full of pills to unalive myself. That one act of being seen changed the entire direction of my life. I'm in my 40s now and run a nonprofit that works with our school to provide food, clothes, school supplies, Christmas gifts, prom dresses, testing fees, pretty much anything a student might lack that takes their focus off being the best them they can be, we work to meet it. I have 4 teens and a dozen more of their friends who view our house as their second home and safe space when things are rough at home. Mr. Williams, you are an angel, and your impact has touched hundreds of kids because you showed me the value of helping kids know they matter. Story 5. I was a senior and my boyfriend at the time was a junior. I had a part-time job at a restaurant and had formed a little crush on one of my coworkers who was a bit older than me. I knew it was unrealistic, but I couldn't help the way I felt. I confided in my APUSH teacher from the previous year who knew both me and my boyfriend. He said to me, quote, "Everything that happens up there in your mind palace is harmless. You can think and feel however you want, and as long as you don't act on those feelings, you're not doing anything wrong." That really grounded me. My boyfriend and I had one of the happiest, fruitful, and stable relationships I've ever been a part of. Although we broke up when I left for college, we're still good friends. Shortly after this conversation, my work crush evolved into an amazing friendship, and he started dating one of our coworkers who became one of my best friends. They're slightly older than me, so I look up to them and joke that they're my parents. They're still the only people I try and see every time I'm in my hometown. Story 6. I went to 13 years of Catholic school. My dad was agnostic, but my mom was from a large Catholic family. even though she wasn't particularly devout herself. I was an altar boy, went through the relevant sacraments, earned the Cub Scout and Boy Scout medals for Catholicism and all that jazz, even though I didn't particularly have strong feelings one way or the other. It's just what everyone I knew did. In order to graduate, every student had to have an exit interview with the school priest to discuss your future as an adult in the church. I walked in for mine, and Father T just stared at me for a minute, and then said, "Nerith, let's be honest and not waste our time. We both know you aren't really a believer and have no intention of continuing in the faith when you leave." I was shocked. I had never said a word to anyone that would indicate this. I just never really gave it much thought. I pointed out that I'd done all the things that had been expected of me. I was a good kid, didn't drink, didn't fornicate. Hell, I didn't even take the Lord's name in vain at that point. I asked him why on earth he would say that about me. He said he just had a hunch, and was he wrong? I thought about and decided he was right, and never looked back. So I have a priest to thank for showing me that not only had I lost my faith, but that I may have never had any to begin with. Story 7. Our physics teacher used to give us tricky questions after explaining concepts to get us used to solving them. In one of the questions, I found his answer to be wrong and corrected him. He listened to me, but couldn't find where he went wrong. He then turned it into a debate with each of us trying to convince the other. Every time I tried to convince him, I had the lingering doubt, what if I'm wrong? What if I made some careless, stupid mistake which gave me the wrong answer? The only reason I still had the courage to hold my own view was the teacher himself. He never dismissed my question, never treated me like an ignorant kid questioning his teacher who knew better. By the end, we had run out of time as the class had ended. Most of my classmates were either trying to convince me he was right by quoting his initial explanation verbatim, or expecting me to be proven wrong. Even if I was right, I was expecting him to either ignore my question or to skip past it. But in the next class, he not only told the class I was right, he explained where he went wrong in his initial explanation and turned it into a teaching moment where he showed us that anyone could make mistakes, but wisdom lies in fixing them. He later told me that even if I were wrong, what I did was right, that I should never hesitate to question anything or anyone as long as I do it in a respectful and courteous way. That lesson never left me, and I just hope that whenever I question something, disagree with someone, or I'm proven wrong, I can do it with enough grace and humility to make him proud. Fantastic teaching moment here for the teacher, admitting that you could possibly be wrong with something that you said, and then, you do your due diligence, you research, and then once it's discovered that the student's right, you own up to it, and you don't bemoan the student for challenging you. So yeah, A+ adulting right there, great teacher, great moment. Story 8. This one is really effed up. Junior year, we had a math teacher we all made fun of because she was a masculine lesbian. I never did myself, but I laughed at the jokes about her and never spoke up or called anyone out, so I consider myself guilty of it. This was 2003, and the height of South Park/Family Guy type humor for a teenager, where everything was funny if it was racist or sexual. Anywho, she was gone for like 3 weeks. We had a sub come in and no one knew what happened to Miss Forrest. She finally came back and looked horrible, like 20 pounds lighter than she already was, greasy hair, bags under her eyes. She looked dead. She started in on our lesson with the overhead projector that she still preferred and put the pen down and told us her girlfriend lost their child and that's why she was gone. She told us how she knows everyone made fun of her, about how she's some mean, manly lesbian, but she tried hard to make math enjoyable for us and she was excited about being a mother and all this really personal stuff. She didn't say any quote specifically that stood out, but the whole hour or so of class, she drilled into us that everyone is a person. I saw teachers as a bunch of lame asses sometimes, but you grow up and see it's just a person trying to help a bunch of kids learn something. But I applied that to everyone. You don't know what people are going through. The crappy feeling resurfaced when Chadwick Boseman passed. Everyone tee-hee-hee at him looking tired and frail, and then felt bad after knowing he had cancer for like 4 years. Miss Forrest was a good example to just be effing nice. Story 9. Our class was supposed to be reading 1984. One day, I showed up to class and our teacher hit us with a pop quiz on the previous night's reading assignment. I had not done the reading, so I was completely unprepared. I did my best to guess the answers on the first couple questions, but after that, I knew it would be obvious that I didn't do the assignment, so I started writing my answers as observations about the book. My last answer was along the lines of, "This book is boring," or "This book is weird." When I got my quiz back, he had written, "How would you know? You haven't read it." I saw that and I knew I was going to prove him wrong. That night, I sat down and read the whole book with the intent of coming to class the next day and telling him why it was weird and boring. Instead, I liked the book and I came to class and told him what I would have done differently, / the same as the main character. He challenged some of my thoughts and I had to do some introspection. I appreciated that he called me out and that he didn't dismiss me when I came back after reading the entire book. From then on, I always made sure I was prepared for assignments. It's paid off in my career when I've been challenged in my work. I've been able to point out why I came to the conclusions that I did and have earned the respect of many people in my company as a result. Story 10. English person checking in. I was doing okay through secondary school and GCSEs. Always got average/good grades and parent-teacher was always the same. Mom and dad were very loving, but gradually mom's drinking got worse and the tension at home got worse as well as my own MH problems that I didn't share. Got good GCSE grades and stayed on to do A-levels. By this point, I didn't want to be home. Me and my brother would plan on running away all the time. I worked a lot to get out of the house and gradually my grades started to drop. But my parents' off-parent-teacher night saying it would be just the same as always. Anyway, inevitable happened and I failed all my A-levels. I had planned on moving out to a nearby city and going to community college to do different A-levels, getting a job to pay my way, etc. I was chatting with my favorite teacher and he told me, well, good luck, but just so you know, people that redo A-levels like you don't do any better. I was so mad. He didn't know my background because me and my brother kept it quiet at school, and I didn't really have any friends, but I trusted him. It made me so determined to go and succeed and prove him wrong, and I spent every day with his words in my head. Through hard work at both school and my job, I managed to get through and pass the second time and got an unconditional offer to my first choice university. They had previously rejected me the first time around. I made some amazing friends at uni, both in England and when I studied abroad in the US. Sadly, I never got to see my teacher to tell him what happened, but I remember his words to this day. Story 11. I failed math from 3rd grade up until sophomore year of high school. My 3rd grade teacher gave me anxiety relating to asking for help when I was confused in math. I remember feeling really bad this one time about not understanding the material after asking for help from her, but it didn't end well. I refused to ask questions afterwards and would silently struggle and fail. I failed Algebra 1 when I first took it freshman year. The teacher I failed with never made me feel bad for the low grades I brought in when taking tests/completing assignments. I remember her telling me that she could see I was really trying to make progress to learn, and she would have me take it again with another teacher that had a different method of teaching. Sophomore year, I really focused on trying to learn, taking notes, and worked on getting over my anxiety of asking questions. The way my new teacher taught accommodated multiple learning styles. I felt safe to come in after school and spend extra time to make sure I understood. My teacher told me she was very proud of my progress and was a very bright student, that I wasn't stupid. I was really smart, but just wasn't learning in the way that worked for me. I ended up getting my first A month in when the unit test rolled around. At the end of the year, I was crying when my report card had a B where Algebra 1 was. I haven't failed math since. I ended up testing a few points under level 4 for algebra, and then took a year's worth of geometry in 6 weeks during summer school, getting C's or better. Story 12. I used to be cute too, you know. And I was really cute. You won't be able to get away with the same crap once you're not cute anymore, and trust me, you won't be cute forever. My senior year English teacher would go off on random rants that had nothing to do with the books we'd been reading. They would go on for several minutes. I could never figure out what was triggering her. Another one was, I hated my father. I felt relieved when he died. It would be interesting to observe some of this stuff as an adult some 20 plus years later. I didn't really understand grown-ups very well back then. This super popular girl in my class who was really effing savvy for a teenager said the reason this particular ranting teacher was constantly snacking out of a giant bag of baby carrots was because she wanted a cigarette. And all those times when the teacher would randomly leave the room for 10 minutes was to go outside to smoke. I had no clue this was going on for most of the year, until later I did see that teacher smoking. Story 13. I was very shy in high school, still am, and had a lot of health stuff going on, mainly in my senior year. A teacher I had in 9th, 11th, and 12th grade will always stick with me. Not only did he have my back during the times that I would get the courage to speak in class, only to be spoken over, it was a small group and we were all close-knit, he also seemed to know that I was going through something senior year. I mean, I did miss a lot of school, but he never explicitly said anything because I always kept up with my work and was still doing relatively well. So it gets to be the last week of school, and each year he would give each of his seniors a senior song. He claimed he didn't put much thought behind them and would just pick a song that came to him, but I don't know how true that was. It happens to be my turn, and he ends up playing Fight Song by Rachel Platten. I know, kinda cheesy, but at the time the song was newer, and something about it just stuck with me. It's like he was saying that he knew I was going through something, but that I was a fighter. He ended up being my favorite teacher from high school because of the way he supported me and always gave me a chance to speak up. A few years after I graduate, he ends up passing away in a tragic way. I still think about him a lot, especially when I hear Fight Song. It's like he gave me that song to carry with me and remember my strength. Story 14. In my sophomore year of high school, I took an AP history class. The teacher happened to be my history teacher in middle school, so she pretty much knew how to teach me as well as most of my classmates. Around the end of the second quarter, I fell into a deep depression. Long story short, I missed school for nearly 6 or so months. I came back, but wasn't much better than I was before. The day I came back was the day we had to do a practice test for the AP exam. I did it and pretty much cried thinking that I effed up big time. The next day, we got them back and I had a 1 out of 5. During class, my teacher was telling all the students we were going to begin reviewing, and that on average, a student usually increases their score by about 2 when comparing the AP test and the practice test. For those that don't know, even getting a 3 out of 5 isn't that great when applying for college credit. Hearing this, I kinda just gave up on the spot. I completely zoned out until the bell rang. I couldn't wait to go back to that depressive state so I couldn't disappoint anyone anymore. I was prepared to wait until the next year to repeat and start the grade over, so I hopped out of my seat and tried to rush to the door. My teacher stopped me as soon as I got up and asked to speak with me. I thought I was in trouble for zoning out, so I kinda just stood and waited for everyone else to leave so we could speak. What I heard made me bawl my eyes out. She said something roughly similar to, "I know that in class I said that the average student increases their score by 2 points, but you're not the average student. I'm very happy to see you in my class, and it would make me so much happier to see you in class again and succeed." She offered to help with personalizing a review process with me so that I could confidently attempt the AP exam and stayed after school with me to help. Hearing those words just made me realize how much people care, and my mood just turned around. I ended up getting a 4 out of 5 on that exam, and I felt so happy about it. I even aced the final exam we had. Thank you, Miss L. Story 15. They accused me of cheating. I was dumbstruck and flatly denied it. Honestly, the assumption of dishonesty wasn't what floored me. It's that a fellow student reported me for cheating from her paper. 1, I had textbooks still sitting on my desk, and no one said anything about removing them, so I hadn't even realized we were taking a quiz. But even so, 2, I wouldn't have cheated from her or anyone else. I was getting the best grades in class, by far. Not bragging, this is a zillion years ago and doesn't even matter now, it's just a fact. And I wouldn't have dreamed of cheating from a classmate's paper because of my own pride. Not that that was always warranted, but for better or worse, I had managed to convince myself of my superiority. Even more importantly, 3, I have terrible eyesight. I couldn't have read her paper unless I stole it from her desk and held it up to my face. Putting number 2 and number 3 together, you may have an image of me as this stereotypical movie geek with bad hair, inconsistent hygiene, and thick glasses who runs about oblivious to their surroundings. You would be more correct than not in this assessment. So yes, I'm totally going to swipe your paper, my dear classmate, in view of everyone, and copy answers that I don't even trust. Sadly, my teacher initially took her side. I remained adamant that I had not cheated. I don't remember how the grading came out. I probably got a 0 on the quiz, but at least I was not further punished for cheating. And by the way, my parents, whose attitude was that if you got in trouble at school, you were automatically in worse trouble at home, these parents of mine took my side. I've never entirely gotten over that insult as I perceived it, though I'm sure no one else on this planet still remembers or cares about the event or its aftermath. Story 16. This being a day old, it might not be seen, but when I was 12, I told my science teacher that I recited all 12 months in a row. I was very excited to be able to do that for the first time and had to tell someone. He said, and I quote, "Why are you excited? Everyone can do that." Then he walked away. We'll never forget that. I felt very stupid and just thought I was. I stopped trying at school and just figured if I'm that stupid, it doesn't matter. My junior year of high school, I had a teach that noticed I was acing tests, but basically zeroing out or just barely passing regular work. He asked what the problem was and could he help. I explained that I'm basically behind and stupid compared to everyone, so what difference does it make? He explained that I wasn't stupid at all, and why would I think that? I told him about my 7th grade teacher and what happened. How, since then, nothing has shown me different. He said that wasn't normal at all, and yes, everyone at that age should be able to recite the months, but if I couldn't, there must be a reason. Parent-teacher conference and tests later, I have dyslexia. Mine manifests in the ability to put things in order. Alphabet, calendar year, grocery lists, etc. My brain mixes them up and it takes a lot of effort and repetition to keep the list in order. 4 years of thinking I was stupid. One teacher not worth a damn, and apparently none of my other teachers even bothering to notice. It took one teacher to make things horrible and one teacher to make things 100 times better. Thankfully, after I was diagnosed, I was given aid, and while I only passed high school with a 2.1, I made the dean's list and graduated college with a 3.8. Probably should toss in here in case anyone sees this. My mom noticed and asked constantly about my grades and how to help. I was embarrassed to tell her what happened and that her son is an idiot. My dad wasn't around. We lived in different states at that time. Story 17. It was the week of senior prom in high school, and our class was having the obligatory auditorium presentation on the dangers of underage drinking and driving. While the presentation itself wasn't very interesting or memorable, what our principal went to say at the end of the presentation was one of the most powerful talks I've ever had in my life. There's 3 types of love in this world. The first is the love you share with another person, a boy, girlfriend, significant other. The second is the love you share with your family, your mother, father, brother, or sister. The third love is one that none of you have experienced yet, and that's the unconditional love of your child. When you have kids, you'll do anything you can to see your child happy, and if anything were to happen to your child and they were taken off this planet, you would never be the same for the rest of your life. So for prom, have fun, but please be careful. If not for yourselves, then for your parents, because I don't want anyone to have to experience what I had to go through when my child was taken from me. His daughter had a very severe epilepsy disorder and had passed the previous October. His energy and passion he put into his words will always stick with me, because he said it from the heart, and he truly didn't want another parent to have to go through the same pain and suffering that he did when he had to bury his own daughter. Story 18. I used to be kind of a female dog in early high school, truly just an echo chamber of friends, and we were all crap talkers / gossipers together. We never invited people into our clique and did mean pranks to other people without ever really getting caught. Teachers knew we were our own little clique, but we were all pretty good students, so we weren't like problematic all around, only socially. I used to tell people they were ugly, or if they didn't catch up to the material in class quick enough, I'd roll my eyes, laugh, etc. I didn't realize it, but at the time, I used it for distraction to things going on at home that I didn't really want my friends to know about. I was hurt and therefore hurt others. I had a geometry teacher that I had a harmless crush on because she was this cool, hippie skater lesbian. I used to stay behind to help her with grades / tutor other kids often. I remember once in 9th grade, we were in the elevator going home and she asked me, if you weren't you, would you be friends with you? And I was like, no. I answered honestly. She paused and then asked me well, wouldn't you want to be someone you could be friends with? It was like a scene out of a movie. I swear my brain felt like it broke. Coincidentally, the elevator door interior was reflective, so I could see myself in it as I processed what she'd said to me. I just remember my brain processing how crappy of a person I'd been. I totally changed my demeanor from there on out. I would not even recognize myself. I'm glad she mentioned this to me before I got worse and really solidified how poor of a person I'd been. Story 19. I was a very depressed kid. I was diagnosed with severe clinical depression and wanting to self-unalive ideation when I was 8 years old. I was also bullied nearly every day for my entire school life. First grade to my senior year, it never stopped. Going into my sophomore year of high school, I got my schedule and saw that I had a particular teacher that everyone said was a huge female dog. I was everything but excited about it. I went into this class with the expectation that she'd be rude or mean or not helpful. She never was. She was always fairly kind. I struggled a lot with my grades because I just didn't care. I was also raising my sister's infant daughter, so I was just tired and apathetic. I fell asleep in class one day. She came over and asked if I was okay. I said, yeah, sorry, I'm just tired. She bent down and whispered, go ahead and sleep. I'll get you some notes for the day so you can go over everything. At the end of the class, she handed me some notes so I could do my homework and learn what everyone did through the day. She was kind to me like that through the entire year. She always helped me if I was struggling and was constantly asking if I was doing all right. On the last day of the year, I had written her a letter and gotten her a small gift. I told her how she was the kindest teacher I've ever had and went above and beyond for me, a kid who didn't matter much to anyone else. I explained to her the things I had been going through and how the little bit of kindness she showed me meant the world. She smiled at me with tears in her eyes and said, I know life hasn't been kind to you and that isn't fair, but you're going to be okay. I promise. You may not be okay today or tomorrow or even next year, but I promise that you will be okay. You matter so much more than you think you do." And she was right. I may not be okay all the time, but I am okay. Story 20. Many teachers, actually. I was constantly told that I was smart, but as long as I let myself be lazy, I wouldn't go very far. I internalized this for years because I felt like I wasn't being lazy. I forgot my homework in my locker. I don't know why. And I thought I had it in my stack of books. I have a master's degree, but I spent the majority of my 20s, until recently, immensely hating myself for sucking at everything, being unable to stay on topic, and just generally could not stop my brain from working overtime on things that didn't matter. I was on medication for depression, anxiety, and OCD, and it took the edge off, but not much more. One day, I was recounting my teacher, saying, "Beam her down, Scotty." My psychiatrist had an idea, and I got sent for testing. I'm not lazy. I have inattentive ADHD, and literally no one gave enough of an F until I was 33 to do something about it. They just told me I was lazy, didn't apply myself, and in reality, I was desperately trying, and the people that spent hours of every day with me had just labeled me as lazy. My parents still think I'm lazy because they don't believe in inattentive ADHD. I'm currently off my medications because of pregnancy, and how quickly things reverted back was scary. I frequently have no idea what's going on. I can miss hours with no idea that much time passed. Not everything your high school teachers say is true. Some of them are lazy and don't care to know you once they've pigeonholed you. Story 21. For a period of time, I wanted to become a high school history teacher, so I did interviews with teachers I had at the time to get a better idea of the job. After tapping out all of my history/social studies teachers, I moved on to other ones who I liked. My chemistry teacher, who had a pretty unorthodox way of running a class, he still was effective, just weird rules and interesting experiments, gave me some of the best advice I've ever heard. He asked me how I would teach about Washington crossing the Delaware. I shrugged and said probably with a documentary or any primary sources. He said that's good if you want to be a boring and average teacher. He asked me again how I could make the students learn about it. I thought a bit and said I didn't know. His answer was simple. What about the gym's pool? He elaborated that he'd have students cross the Delaware in canoes with the school pool and maybe throw stuff in the water to make them get a real idea of how tough it was for Washington and his men. He explained that if you really want to make an impact on any kind of audience, you can't settle for average run-of-the-mill methods. Yeah, so where was this guy when I was coming up through school? I would have loved to have, gone across the school pool like Washington. It's the same thing like with coaching, teaching, anything that involves like an adult teaching mastery of something to a student. You have to make it fun and engaging, and otherwise you're going to lose them if you just go by the book. So, good method. Story 22. My English teacher in my second high school, when I traveled to study in the UK, was a genuinely brilliant man. He was a little eccentric and occasionally aloof with students, but the fact remains that his passion for English and the literature we studied was like no teacher I've had before or since. A good teacher is memorable. A great teacher is mesmerizing. Anyway, I was stressing about my GCSEs, exams taken at the end of year 11/11th grade in the UK, and went to him for some extra help after school. After 2 hours of head down, pencil-breaking studying, I got up to leave. He beckoned me over as I went to the door and said a piece of advice that has since enshrined itself ahead of all the inspirational quotes and sayings in my mind. Be resilient enough to work hard and patient enough to earn what you deserve. Putting in the hard yards and expecting instant improvement had been my mindset up to this point, and this quote shifted it all around in my head. I was always a 2 student in English. But at times, the pressure I put upon myself was the biggest challenge. Learning to work towards a goal gradually, instead of burning out in a speed studying frustration, changed everything about the way I study. And I owe both my 9s, 9 is the highest grade in GCSE exams, in English language and literature to him. Funnily enough, that teacher actually won an award the year before while teaching our year 10 poetry class, and was rated as the best high school teacher in England. He was truly an incredible man. I hope someday I can make it back to the UK, buy him a drink, and thank him in person. Story 23. This wasn't said to me exactly, but about me and my family situation. For some context, I have an interesting home life. What's relevant here is that my mother's a bit controlling and overprotective. I was also super close with my first year English and social studies teachers. They're also best friends outside of school. And so was my best friend who's 2 years behind me. One day after I left for college, my friend was sitting in the social studies room for lunch. The English teacher was there too, and they said that they missed me. The social studies teacher then said something to the effect of, "It's a really good thing Spencer got away from his mother." Both my friend and the English teacher were taken aback by the tone of that statement, and my friend told me about it on FaceTime later. Fast forward 3 months to Christmas break. I go back home and I'm realizing that my relationship with my mom changed a F-ton. While we used to be super close, it was pretty clear that her and I both changed individually a lot, and that we changed to be very far apart. I also had coffee with both the social studies and English teachers during the break, and the first question they asked, after pleasantries and whatnot, was, "How are things with your mom?" I've always been struck by how right that teacher was, and how well she predicted the end of my mother and I's relationship as we knew it. Story 25. Sure, stop lying and have fun at the beach. My 9th grade Spanish teacher, in response to my cousin and I telling her we would not be at class the following Monday because our grandfather died and we would be at his funeral. F you, Mrs. I. I'm glad you got stuck on a 0.5 FTE until I graduated. Oh, you look so tired. Here's the pillow for my desk. Take a nap. I know you'll catch up. My 11th grade English teacher to me after I had come back in 3 days after I had a seizure in school. Mrs. M was such a great teacher. I think we were studying for the final exam. She cared about the students before anything else. She was 5'0" and kept a pile of junk near the classroom door. One day, someone asked her about it and she told us that it was there in case an active shooter was in the building. She'd move all that crap in front of it, along with her filing cabinet, and have us run into the woods near the school and find our way to a neighborhood because she did not want to risk any of us. I don't remember any specific quotes, but there was also a first-year teacher who had lunch duty and would talk to me at least 1 to 2 days a week. I sat alone every day during lunch and Mr. B would come and talk to me, ask me how things were going, and we'd just talk. I'm pretty sure it's because he probably thought I was depressed or a possible shooter or something like that, because I was alone all the time and never talked to anyone else. But it was nice talking to someone every once in a while in between bites of my chicken patty, fries, and blue slush in our 22-minute lunch period. Story 26. If it's squishy, it's biology. If it's smelly, it's chemistry. If it doesn't work, it's physics. Or alternatively, on a slightly more meaningful note, something a different physics teacher told me. I don't remember her exact wording, but essentially she told me something I don't think I've ever heard before from any other teacher with as much genuine joy and passion and truth. And that was just how much she admired and enjoyed my passion and curiosity, without any buts or howevers. That's not meant as a brag, it's just that I spent my entire high school career hearing stuff like, "Your joy and enthusiasm for the subject was a delight, but you need to step back and allow your classmates room to participate." A valid criticism, and one that I still keep in mind to this day, since it's really important. But hearing, genuinely and truthfully, from this teacher who I admire dearly, that my contributions in class brought her joy and wonder and made her think, without any mention of over-participation or anything, is something I'll never forget. It's a difficult feeling to put into words, but I guess the best way I can describe it is that after so long, I was finally being told that my curiosity and my very, say, flamboyant expression of my passion for the subject was valid and something that I should never let go of, by someone who always matched my love and enthusiasm for it. I have so many stories about why I love this teacher, and I may have done a poor job explaining this example, but if you get it, you get it. Keep looking up, people. Story 27. A biology teacher. His name was Mr. Caldwell. He came off as exceptionally chipper with an attitude that was almost comically put on, to the point where he didn't hide it, but honestly, nobody cared, because it was better than half the teachers who just did not give a crap. However, whenever he would get serious or deep, his demeanor would change. One day we're sitting in class, and some kid, who was not one of the better or brighter of the class, got annoyed at Mr. Caldwell telling a story and said, quote, "Man, this is boring." Mr. Caldwell's demeanor changed like a switch, and without missing a beat, immediately whipped out, "Class, only boring people get bored." It seemed like it went over everyone's head because of how quick he said it, but it was like a monolith moment for me that I've never forgotten. It taught me 2 things. It taught me that every situation is interesting with the right mindset. Explore outside of your close-minded way of thinking, and there's wonder in a lot that you overlook. Also, that if the people around you are always bored, maybe you're not with the right people. Story 28. This might not fit the theme here, but it's something that I've never forgotten. My gym teacher was giving a talk about why we need to work hard in life and be determined, and he said, "You don't want to end up living on 5th and X, street name, when you grow up, do you?" He was referencing a neighborhood on the lower east side of the city where POC outnumber white people, and which also happens to have higher crime rates and the 3rd lowest income level in the state. That neighborhood was 4 blocks from my house, on my street, and I felt so called out and ashamed knowing that people probably thought my parents were just losers who didn't work hard enough and ended up in the ghetto, when in reality they had lost a child, gone into bankruptcy because my stepfather's grief resulted in alcoholism and a gambling addiction, and moved in my grandparents' house of over 50 years to save money and help them while my grandma was dying from cancer. The blatant classism and subtle racism coming from a generally respected authority figure definitely made me start to take what adults said with a grain of salt at a fairly young age. Story 29. Exasperated, he then turned to the class and began explaining how my friend and I would most likely end up working at McDonald's, unable to support children, and would later deeply regret our decisions to pursue our dreams. Coach was giving some random lecture on personal finance, maybe, and began to ask students about their future plans to help with this illustration. My friend and I were in the front row, so he started asking us what we hoped to do with our lives, to which I answered to be an actor, and to which my friend said to be a musician. Exasperated, he then turned to the class and began explaining how my friend and I would most likely end up working at McDonald's, unable to support children, and would later deeply regret our decisions to pursue our dreams. It was mortifying, terribly rude, many things. Story 30. When I was in 4th grade, there was this giant 6th grader that bullied me. One day, I couldn't take it anymore and told the teacher on playground monitoring duty. She snapped at me that no one likes a tattletale. That stuck with me. Then there was my calculus teacher in junior high. I had just moved from New York to Texas mid-semester and realized that Texas seemed far ahead of me in maths. Super shy then, but worked up the courage to ask the teacher for help to a math problem after class. She told me the answer, trying to get back to a book or something she was reading. I asked again, saying I wasn't sure how to reach that answer on my own to solve the others. She looked at me like I was the most stupid person she's ever met, and said the answers for the others are in the back of the textbook. That's all I needed. I said, and she told me to take it to my parents. I don't have a dad, and my mom never finished 6th grade education, so no help there. Never did learn. When those problems came up on state tests that year, I just guessed a random answer. Hate math to this day because of that one teacher. Good one. My science teacher in high school let me hang out in his classroom during lunch when I hadn't made any friends yet and was super shy. He saw that I enjoyed drawing anime style and gave me some how-to manga books. He told me that it didn't matter that I didn't like science or math, that I would be an artist, a successful one at that. He knew it. Gave me confidence when I had none. We would all just sit there in comfortable silence while we ate, and he invited me to leave drawings on his chalkboard for his next class to see. Story 31. You're a bad influence on the other girls. TLDR, had an eating disorder, taken overdose, got told off by teacher for having an eating disorder. Years later, I came forward to police about what happened to me to cause my coping mechanism, my ED. Basically, I suffered with an eating disorder that became very apparent at age 17, and other girls started to either use eating disordered behaviors / get self-conscious of their weight or just get offended by my body and that I was making them uncomfortable. Girls decided to go to the head of the year and complain about me. In the classroom, one-to-one with this teacher, she starts telling me off basically, how I'm a bad influence and need to stop this. After apologizing for being a bad influence and telling her I don't mean to be and I try my best to hide all my struggles, I kept saying I'm going to be sick. Sat with the bin in front of me whilst being told off for having my eating disorder. I don't remember bits of the conversation as I was seeing double and was off my head. Okay, ran out of the class and found the nearest toilet. Banged on the door to make the person hurry up and ran past them without even closing the door and threw up. Yes, other students in the hall saw me throw up. Mortified now that I think back on it. What the teacher didn't know was that I had taken a huge overdose the night before, and I was so low and felt hated because of how I was. Ended up in hospital because of it. Years later, I came forward and went to the police and told them about being SA'd / abused by my stepfather years earlier. That's what I think was the root of my eating disorder. No one knew I had this huge secret eating me up. My ED was my way of coping. I took him to court and he got 14 years. I'll never forget that teacher. She could have helped me then, took me serious. I didn't choose to have an eating disorder and hated life, and certainly did not want any other student triggered by my thin body or my eating disorder. Also, I went on to suffer with my ED for years. It's 10 years later, and 8 of those years have been close to death more times than I can count. Been a BMI of just over 10, had a feeding tube, sent to specialist ED hospitals, been in ICU, been in kidney failure, the list goes on. I always wonder if I would have got help and support back then from my school when they first started to notice things. Would it have helped me from going so far downhill? Haven't been to hospital for 2 years and doing a lot better. Still have struggles, but a lot better. Sorry, that was long, guys. If you read that, sending you a hug. And sending you a hug right back, OP. Thank you for sharing your story. Glad to hear, of course, that you are doing better. Just wanted to shout you out. Story 32. Mr. James Ross Preeper. When I was a kid, I pretty much had no friends and read books and wrote journals and made mixtapes and kept to myself. School sucked, but then we all heard there was this really cool vice principal / English teacher that everyone really loved, and I begged the universe to get me into his class. And it worked, lol. This guy had a class mascot named Mr. Turnip, which was literally a turnip with Google eyes glued onto it. He was always in a different spot in the class, and Mr. Preeper gave him a whole personality that would interact with the class during our lessons. He also told us stories of a relative of his named the Great Ralph Waldo Preeper. Obviously, I know now that it's a nod to Emerson, but he'd spin tales of how he also got lost in the Barrens once, or had a pet wolf, or went trekking out in deserts and crap. It was just total fuel for the imagination, non-stop. When the year was over, me and my friend Alicia had gotten super close to him, and he gave us end-of-the-year gifts. To this day, I'm still jealous because he gave her a nice jewelry set, but gave me a box of chocolates and a card that I still have to this day. It says, basically, keep on dreaming, and remember to always ask the questions that the great Waldo Preeper would. That man will stick to my memory to death and back. He was awesome. Story 33. Not a high school teacher, but it happened while I was in high school. In my junior year, a culmination of medical conditions had finally made it so that it was physically impossible for me to attend school anymore. I was at an all-time low. I fell out of contact with everyone I thought was a good friend, and I felt like I wasted everyone's time and space. So, in a last-ditch effort, I emailed my old first-grade teacher and just kind of told her that I missed her and that she was the best teacher I'd ever had. Bless this woman, she knew something was wrong. She called my father to confirm our address, came by the house, sat and had coffee with me. She even had a whole bunch of printouts for mental health resources. During this, she took me by the hand and said, "When you're caught in a riptide, you can't just swim to shore. You have to find another way. I know it seems hopeless, dear, but you've always been a strong swimmer. When I'm at a low again and I think about the nuclear option, I remember that. I can keep swimming." Story 34. You know, some guy named Wilson, your lackluster performance in my class is going to cause you to not graduate, but I can help you get to a passing grade if you're willing to work for it. He then told me to get on my knees, close my eyes, and open my mouth. I was terrified, but I did as he told me because my dad was going to kick me out of the house if I didn't graduate and get my diploma. And unfortunately, I was more scared of my dad than I was of that disgusting predator in the moment. I was 17. Mr. Krisniak, if you're somehow reading this, I hope you're slowly dying alone and miserable. I heard your wife left you and took your kids away, so you're definitely on your way there. He did get fired a few years after I graduated, but not for abusing his students. He got fired because he called a black student the N-word. Yeah, he was just a despicable person all around. From what I gather, he abused so many more kids than just me, but he never faced any consequences for it. I could have reported him, but I didn't because of how terrified I was of not graduating and becoming homeless at 17. So if you went to that high school in upstate New York and you had a similar experience with him as your teacher, my heart goes out to you. And I'm sorry that I was too scared to do anything and report him, because if I did, he might not have been able to get his hands on any other students. I'm so sorry. Story 35. New biology teacher for senior year. Think it was his first year teaching. He was super chill and we always stayed a few minutes after to talk video games or D&D or something. Gets to be the night of the senior lock-in and he holds me back after a set of doors closed to tell me something alone. Hey man, just so you know, your IA, 13-page thesis paper, was effing awesome, dude. It was fantastic. I don't know if you ever plan on working in that field at all, but you know your crap. The way you talk about everything and the graphs and statistics you used were phenomenal. My essay was on marijuana's long and short-term effects on multiple mental health conditions. He then proceeded to offer to put me in contact with his brother, who works in a facility doing exactly that type of testing, and basically offered me a job. While I didn't take it, he said the offer always stands, and I will never forget you or what you told me, Mr. McDonald. Story 36. Negative experience here. TLDR, my form teacher, who was a Muslim, Islam, told me to forgive my bully because Allah, Islam God, forgave him, so I should do the same. FYI, I believe in universalism. I've never been able to forget those words. To this day, I've never been so let down by a teacher, and I regret not reporting this to the authorities. More details below. I come from a pretty religious and racial diverse country. The predominant religion here is 33% Buddhist, 20% no religion, 15% Islam. In high school, I was bullied pretty badly by a guy. I had a whole stack of receipts and showed it to my Muslim, Islam form teacher. The bully was not remorseful and he was a scholar. Important to note that he was also a Muslim, Islam, and the same race as my form teacher. The next day, she told me that I should forgive the bully as Hari Raya al-Duriti just passed. For the Muslims, Islam, during the celebration, they have a practice where they seek forgiveness from their ancestors and Allah. She said since the bully had prayed and seek forgiveness in Allah, Islam/Muslims God, forgave him, he is now a clean slate. Thus, I should forgive him, not report him, and put this behind me. She also added that she believed he liked me, and that's why he bullied me. If you read all this, you're a champ. Story 37. If you were sorry, you wouldn't have done it. I've never forgotten that. The context isn't as clear 28 years later, but it was something extremely minor that I did, like accidentally bump into a desk or something, or drop something onto the ground. I remember saying I'm sorry, and the teacher stopping everything the class was doing, come over to me, stare me dead in the face and say, if you were sorry, you wouldn't have done it. I was 9 at the time and had no idea how to reply. I had never experienced just blatant ignorance like that before, even from other kids. I remember trying to explain, and all that he said back was, sounds like a bunch of excuses to me, or something like that. Right then and there, I realized that even if they are an adult, they might not care about you, your feelings, or your well-being at all. It made me understand that there are selfish and rude people out there of all types and in all positions, and to watch out for them. It made me more cautious on how I deal with other people and how I interact with them, and has helped me keep a lot of crappy people out of my life because I spotted who they were from a mile away. On a totally separate note, he used to have a filing cabinet in the classroom with gum stuck all over the one side. If you got caught with gum in his class, he would make you take it out, stick it on the cabinet, and then grab another and chew it for the rest of the class. Story 38. My literature teacher told us about the 3 U's: past you, present you, and future you. Past you has already said and done their piece and cannot be changed. What past you has done is set in stone. Present you is the you are right now and can either accept past you's mistakes/accomplishments and continue them, or decide to change the course past you has set. Future you is the one who will either reap the rewards past you and present you have sown, or will be forced to deal with the consequences of their failures. It was supposed to be a don't procrastinate on your 5-page writing assignments type lecture, but it ended up being a pretty deep conversation with the whole class about setting yourself up for success, as the only you have the power to change is present you, and you should always be thinking of how your actions will impact future you. Because eventually, things cannot always be pushed off to the future, and those consequences/rewards will be held in present you's hands. When that happens, will you be pleased with what you hold, or will you be cursing past you and wondering how you could do this to yourself? It left a pretty big impact on me that's carried me through college and into the workplace. It's still, at its heart, a don't procrastinate mantra, but I'm often finding little things past me did with future me in mind, things I'd forgotten I'd done that suddenly become a boon way down the line. Story 39. It was my junior year and I had one of 3 open starting spots on our varsity team. Majority were returning seniors. We had a field trip to San Francisco to check out the Mint for an assignment, but it was on a Thursday and I would miss practice. Games were on Fridays. Holy hell, this is when I realized most adults really are children in old-ass people's bodies. The coaches said I'm not allowed to go on the field trip or I'd lose my starting spot and right guard. I'm effing 16 at the time, planning to go to college. My teacher says if I don't go, I get an F, and that dropped my A to a B. Not a big deal, but it was for getting into a UC. Then began one of the most stressful and depressing weeks of my teenage life. There literally wasn't a correct choice to make, and I was absolutely heated that these adults were putting these tough-ass decisions on me. I just wanted to play ball and get my grades, man. Anyways, the thing I remember from my high school teach is when he came up to me the day before the field trip and told me how stressful this must have been for me. He told me he didn't understand it at first because he's not a football fan, but he told me it's bullcrap that I have to make a choice like that. He gave me an alternative assignment. Mind you, I was genuinely looking forward to going to the city. Man, that would have been so much fun. And I got to turn it in and keep my spot. Story 40. I was in high school during the 1980s, during the Reagan years when the Soviet Union was very definitely the enemy. Our principal went on a trip to the USSR and gave a talk to our class about it. I think about half of us thought he was a commie or something, and figured anything he said would be propaganda, so we weren't really interested in listening to him. We all knew the Russians were evil. He noticed our enmity and guessed the reason for it. He just said, "Don't believe everything the media tells you. People are people. They may talk a different language from us and have a few different customs, but deep down, they're people just like us. They want to live a decent life and for their kids to have a better life than they have." That really struck home for some reason. Ever since then, I've been a bit skeptical when the media are demonizing any group of people, and skeptical in general when I notice I'm being fed a consistent message in the media. Is it the truth, or is it a line someone's trying to push? Story 41. Maybe this is not what this thread was looking for exactly, but I had a physics teacher my senior year of high school. He was an older gentleman and had a reputation for being crotchety and grumpy. I sat in the front row next to his desk, and as a senior, he would get irritated with me as I would crack jokes and I would push his buttons sometimes. Even though I was a senior, I didn't throw away the class like others because of senioritis, and I always took the work and material seriously. Now, in my opinion, he wasn't the best teacher. I stayed after school to get some extra help on some problems I was having some issues with. Basically, I was rushing and trying to do parts of the equation in my head rather than writing them out. He looked me right in the eyes and said, "You're smart. Writing your work out doesn't make you dumb. Slow down and just write out your work." Getting the affirmation about my intelligence from a teacher I felt didn't even like me just really stuck with me. I wasn't a bad student, but I was nowhere near the top of my class, and getting those few words of praise is a moment I still think about. For what it's worth, taking your time on a problem rather than just trying to solve it as fast as possible for the sake of being smart or just to have an answer is sound advice. Story 42. Angrily, when I was in junior school and had to get into our cold outdoor swimming pool with a changing body I was embarrassed about, and scared and absolutely bawling my eyes out, the female teacher yelled at me in front of the entire class saying, "Silly little girl, just get out and get dressed and give up," waving off her hand in dismissal at my perceived pathos. I'm 39. It's clear as day in my mind, and to this day, I am ashamed and terrified of swimming. I'll get in the water rarely, but nobody around me knows what's happening in my mind. This, and also once in high school, we did a cooking class, and I threw a slice of cucumber at the very high ceiling in our class, and wouldn't you know it, it stuck. Instead of getting disciplined, the teacher and students were in fits of laughter. That cucumber remained there for months and remained a source of hilarity until it met its end. Story 43. I've told this tale many a time and will tell it again and again. My high school psych teacher had a class on the topic of stress and told us a story about when she lost her husband. There's no quote, but a tale nevertheless. Car crash happened at night. She didn't hear about it until morning because she kept her phone off at nighttime. For a while, she felt massive guilt over not being available immediately, but over time, she realized that if she had her phone on during the night and gotten the call, then what? Her husband was dead on impact. She couldn't have seen him or saved him for that matter. She would have been exhausted on top of the grief and panic, potentially snowballing the stress in her body and making recovery that much more difficult. With a solid night's sleep behind her, she could tackle the reality with much more clarity and strength and handle things as needed handling, grieve as needed grieving. She used this story to tell us the importance of both sleep and making yourself unavailable sometimes. We need time to ourselves to recover from the day-to-day, and more so in times of crisis and high stress. It's been many, many years since I heard her tell that story, but it still sticks with me as a big lesson in life. Story 44. My second semester of senior year, I was taking an elective about computer programming, a subject I had no interest in. Always a class clown, there was something about the combination of the final semester, the low stakes, and my emotional maturity, toddler with a driver's license, that inspired me to new heights of obnoxiousness. Unfortunately for the teacher, and much to her disappointment, I'm sure, I was getting an A in the class. Not because I'm a genius, it was just a really easy class. She never gave any outward sign that I was driving her crazy, at least not that my clueless ass picked up. So when she pulled me aside one day about midway through the semester, I was blindsided. She point blank asked me to drop the class. In that confidential chat, she informed me that my constant joking is a huge distraction, making it impossible for her to teach and for other students to learn. This was the biggest bucket of cold water I'd ever been doused in. I had no idea that I was driving her crazy or disrupting class. I thought everybody loved me. I found the revelation horribly embarrassing, and to her credit, she delivered it for maximum humiliating effect, not by yelling or threatening, but by treating me like an adult, quietly stating that she could not stand to have me in class, that I was a detriment to other students' educations. I still shudder to recall every single word. When my breath came back to my body, I explained to her that I unfortunately needed the credit to graduate, so I could not drop the class, but I promised her that I would stop being a problem in class immediately, and I was good to my word. Like a lot of extroverts, I came late to the idea that the world is not waiting for my next funny thought to be expressed. I would have to learn it over a few times, but I'll never forget this first embarrassing lesson in learning to just shut the F up. Story 45. Freshman year English class, and just to preface, this teacher had a massive problem with me all throughout high school. Problems that culminated in her being disciplined after an exchange of words a few years later. Was doing an assignment where the task was to research what you wanted to do post-high school graduation. I had researched a bunch of state universities in my area and asked the teacher what the difference was between a polytechnic school and a liberal arts school. Her response? I don't think you'll be college material by the time you graduate. Maybe you should look into different opportunities, like insert a blue-collar job, don't remember specifically. Graduated high school with a 3.8 GPA, captain of 2 sports teams for 2 years each, worked at after-school care for younger students, was in the student outreach program, paired with a special needs classmate essentially for the day once per week, got a 30 on my ACT, and was accepted to all 10 public and private universities I applied to, including the 2 Big Ten schools in my area. Graduated with a BBA in 4 years, held 2 internships in college, worked 30 hours a week, was the president of a student org, and had about as much fun as any typical college kid. So F her, basically. Maybe she did it to motivate me, but I think she's just a miserable person. Story 46. My religion teacher. If you're an atheist, it's okay, but you have to respect believers. And in the same way, you have to demand respect from believers if you're not getting it from them. There's never a thing like absolute truth. 2 people can hold opposite views on something, and yet both can be right. Truth is a very subjective concept. Being 15 and listening to this from a priest was shocking to say the least, and many, many more like those during quite a few years. Even 20 years later, I still remember many of his lessons. The way he taught, he was more of an ethics teacher than a religion teacher. He made us think a lot, and we felt a lot of freedom to ask anything we wanted at his class. We would engage in debates, which were really eye-opening for many of us. Guy went into hunger strike with some others to force our government to spend more money to battle hunger in third world countries. He was kicked out of it because he was going to die, and he was willing to. There are thousands of children dying of starvation every day. I'm 65 years old. It does not matter if I die. It matters that they do. In the national news. Absolute effing legend, this guy. Story 47. Had a history teacher one time in my senior year. I didn't need the class to graduate, and I didn't want to be there. But because both late arrival and early release periods can't happen at the same time, one or the other, I was forced to take, state name here, studies, even though I planned to move away from my home state and had no intentions of going into history. The class was a snooze, but there was one project that caught my attention: designing your dream home. Sure, why not? Teacher told me that I have such vast potential, but I squander it. A couple of people have said this about me at various times in my life, but the joke's on them. They're making a proverbial dime. I'm making a proverbial dollar. The moral of the story? If you know what you want to do early in life, stop at nothing to achieve it. Even when people think your talents lie elsewhere, they may see you squandering, but you're really being selective. Unless you're lazy and smoking weed 24/7, then you may in fact be squandering your potential. Story 48. Not high school, but grade 5. I have ADHD. Part of the issue, other than the typical attention issues, is that I process information differently. This teacher used to work solely with kids with disabilities before coming to this school, and told me once after class what would change my academic career forever. You know you can ask questions, right? Her. I feel bad slowing the class down with questions only I have. Me. You should never feel bad for learning in a school. Ask as many questions as you need. If any teacher has a problem with this, they're not meant to be teachers. Her. Fast forward through my academic career, and I've confidently asked so many questions, sometimes 10 plus in one class to fully understand, when normally I would have felt bad and I've never been asked to ask less questions. Thank God I'm out of school, but I feel this has made me a generally more curious person and enjoy learning a lot more now. Story 49. Not so much told me, but what she did. I was a quiet dude in classes where I was without my friends. In ninth grade, I was in my science class and we were going over balancing chemical equations. I was pretty good at it. I was crushing on my teach too, so I was a little more outgoing when it came to spitting out the correct answer. I went up to the board to solve an equation, and on my way back, a kid made fun of the way I walked. Openly, in front of everyone. I outwardly brushed it off. Inwardly, I was mortified. In front of the whole class, she yelled at this kid and stuck up for me. I'm older, so her tactic probably would be frowned upon these days, but she basically pointed out that I'd solved every equation right, and he hadn't gotten a single one. She basically called him stupid without saying he was stupid. She then went on to say, quote, "That's the guy that's going to have a nice house, beautiful wife, and a happy family. With the way you're going, you'll be on the news and on your way to jail more often than not." Paraphrased, but with a high degree of confidence and accuracy. I hope she was wrong on the last part. He was never really that mean to me, any more harshly than that. He did apologize and looked a little hurt by what she'd said. I remember that he did change a little after that moment, was a little bit more polite, and even would joke with me here and there. So yeah, it may seem harsh. I personally don't think that it is. Sometimes you just need to club someone over the top of the head with a cool dose of reality and humility. And, they change once they're forced to confront mistakes and character flaws. So, I think both of them ended up better off because of this. Good job, Teach. Story 50. Senior year PE. Following high school, if you don't make fitness a priority, it won't be. It'll be up to you to maintain your exercise and health when organized sports won't be forcing you to. I've always made my health a priority after she said that. Don't think of economics as just math. Think of it as the psychology of how people spend money. Junior year history teacher. I went on to get degrees in both economics and psychology after my intro econ course in high school. The Jesuits will challenge you in more ways than just academia. Senior year English teacher. I went to a Jesuit school and progressed my personal development far beyond what I ever thought possible. Honestly, I had amazing high school teachers and will forever support robust public education systems for that reason. Story 51. Background. My family is from Greece. I was born here in Canada, but I can still speak and read the language, though it is lessening with age since I don't use it as much on a daily basis. On to the story. In grade 12 English, we had an absolutely bizarre woman as our teacher. She was mildly racist, liked pitting students against each other, and exhibited blatant favoritism towards 2/3 of the students. I was one of these students, though her attitude towards me would change depending on if I spoke to any of the less exceptional students. Her words. This woman had issues. On one of my good weeks, we were going through the Greek alphabet. For fun. No idea where this started. I think we were doing something with Shakespeare. I, of course, was able to recite the entire alphabet from alpha to omega. The teacher proceeded to say verbatim to her absolute favorite student that you should be friends with Nota_Bean. They're Greek and they can help you with your Latin, which will be really important when you get to pharmacy school. The fact that a grown adult with a university education and teaching degree could not tell the difference between two wildly different languages has always stuck with me. It's been over 15 years. I still don't know a lick of Latin. Story 52. Longtime lurker, talking years. But this post is the one that finally broke me. I played varsity basketball as a sophomore in high school. We were playing our main rival. I got in the game and brought us back from a large deficit. I was on my A game, until the end of the game anyways. Long story long, I missed the game-winning free throw. No one remembers how great you played anymore, and they're right. Seniors were pissed at me. School was taking a crap about me. I was devastated and depressed. Cried in the locker room. I was so disappointed in myself. I didn't want to go back to school the next day. Dad said I could sleep in and that he'd take me if I felt like it, as he knew what I was going through. I end up going to school late the next day. I walk into my history class. The teacher was a phenomenal mentor to me. He could tell how bad I was doing. I came in, sat down, and he just carried on with class normally. When he had a moment, he came right next to my desk and whispered so no one else could hear. Son, just remember that there's so much more to life than a missed free throw. I felt the world lift off my shoulders in that moment, and I'll never forget it. Story 53. A little background is needed for context. Sorry, this is a bit long. I was really bad at math in high school. 8th through 10th grade were really hard for me at home, and it carried over into school, and math was the biggest victim. I took honors geometry in 10th grade. I had improved my grades in 9th grade just enough to be able to do this, and did terribly because of lack of effort and focus. The teacher was one of the best teachers I would ever have, so it wasn't because of him. In 12th grade, I needed to take honors calculus because I wanted to major in chemistry in college, and I had to sign a waiver to do so, which was basically a form that said you shouldn't be taking this class, and by signing this paper, you and your parents are aware of this. The calculus teacher was the same one from 10th grade. In the beginning, I really struggled with the material. Shocker. But then, one day it clicked and I was getting an A in calculus when I barely passed geometry. I got called down to the office one day and found out that I was named Math Student of the Month and was shocked. When I went to thank my teacher for nominating me, his response stuck with me. He said, "When I saw you on my roster, I thought you weren't going to make it and would drop by the end of September. You proved me wrong, and I'm so proud of you." It was so honest and sincere, and one of the greatest compliments I've ever received. Story 54. My freshman year, I made the freshman basketball A team. I was the only person of color, half black, half white, on the team at a 95% white school. My coach was also my history teacher. We lost the first 3 games of the season, and both players and parents were a bit frustrated with how things were going. I played maybe 5 minutes total in those 3 games. My focus was just trying to get better during practice and to play my hardest in those few minutes I did get. We had a team meeting one week along with individual meetings with the coaches. The coaches told most of my teammates how they were doing and where they could improve. The head coach told me, quote, "I don't want to have to look over my shoulder to make sure you're happy, and if I don't like that, then I should quit." I was a nice, quiet, hard-working kid who was just trying to get by in a new school where I hardly knew anyone. I found out later he did not like my father, who's black, and was taking it out on me, at a Catholic school no less. The next year, I nearly left because of the racist and hypocritical behavior of several teachers and staff members, including a priest being arrested for inappropriate contact with students. His words hurt. Even at 14, I still did not fully understand race and why or how someone could dislike another for something out of their control, like skin color or who their parents were. I'll never forget his words because I never want to be like him. Story 55. 10th grade English teacher who had done his year of student teaching during my 9th grade English class. Basically had him as a teacher for 2 years. I was an advanced kid, so I was reading at a higher grade level than a lot of my classmates, and he and I had some great conversations about the books we had read for class because of this. For a variety of reasons, I went through a period those 2 years where I didn't apply myself to school at all, and was not going to classes and just effing around in general. We had mass layoffs on the last day of my 10th grade year, and word got around that he was one of the teachers that got the pink slip that day. I played softball and had a game that day, so I wasn't going to be in his class. So he came to the team bus and asked to speak with me. He spoke to me from the heart about how I was better and smarter and how I had been carrying myself, and that I had so much potential, that he was looking forward to where I would be in 10 years as long as I got it together and applied myself. I had a few other teachers that had said similar things to me, but there was something about the fact that he went out of his way to come look for me and let me know how he felt. Really impacted me. I've tried finding him on Facebook or other platforms just to thank him and give him that 10-year update, but I've had no luck. Story 56. I thought you were lazy. Kinda sounds bad, but it did seem like it. He used to be my English teacher when I was grade 10, and I have a genuinely hard time keeping up with other students because I had a terrible anxiety, and I'd always end up paralyzed out of fear of either starting my work only to F up or hating myself because I'm wasting time because I hadn't started in fear of effing up. Unfortunately, no one knew that and assumed I'm a lazy bastard that half-asses everything. By grade 11, more than half of my class transferred to a different school or went back to our home country because our school didn't offer a lot of SHS tracks, and we got a few new students. That, to me, was a huge wave of relief because almost everyone in my class saw me as the dumb/lazy kid, and it felt like I had to fix the unfixable with them around. My then English teacher became our oral communication teacher, where he required us to provide an index card where he'd put our grades in for every single activity, and since it was an oral communication class, we had to write a lot of speeches and present them. The first time we did that, I made new friends who treated me like their baby sister and cheered me on, saying that if I ever got nervous, I should just look at them, which calmed me down a bit. But our teacher had a blank look on his face with no way to tell what he was thinking. Seeing him like that felt like I finally had a clean slate. I could either make or break this. Like I said, I already had a terrible reputation where even before I got up from my seat, other teachers would already look disappointed and uninterested, which honestly makes my anxiety even worse than it already was. I did my speech, still nervous as F, but at least I got to finish it without breaking down and crying. After everyone finished their speech, our teacher gave back our index cards, and when I looked at mine, I saw an actual constructive criticism. No manage your time, no focus more, no stop being lazy. Just no vague criticisms that I often get since I started high school. He did that to every student, but that helped me a lot because I finally knew what was wrong exactly and what I did good that I could improve. I didn't go from being the dumbest/laziest kid in class to being the smartest, but that teacher saw how much I've improved based on his criticisms, so by the end of the school year, my class went out with him as a sort of celebration to a successful event that we held, gave us his impressions towards each of us, and that's when he told me that, quote, he thought I was lazy. It just felt great that not only did I get a teacher that genuinely helped me to improve as a student, but he also acknowledged every improvement I made, no matter how little it might be. I owe him a lot, and I give him full credit for every achievement I've done, because I never would have grown as both a student and person if it weren't for him. Story 57. When I was in junior high, I had moved from one state to another mid-year. I played the flute, and had been since I was 11 years old. My new band director put me in last chair because he didn't know what my background was. I was in 8th grade at the time. Our county had 2 high schools and had a special band that took the best of the best and had them play together for 3 days and then perform a concert at the end of those 3 days. I thought that I would try out just for the fun of it. A week after the auditions, my band director asked me to stay after class. I went to see him, and he said to me, "Why didn't you tell me you could play?" I looked at him strangely, and he said, "Out of 12 flute players they accepted to play an all-county band, you placed 3rd chair. Do you know that you beat out juniors and seniors in high school?" I was shocked, to say the least. I went from last chair to first right after that, and stayed in first chair all the way from junior high to high school. My band director took me under his wing as I was having problems at home from an abusive mother, and I'll never forget his kindness. I keep up with him on Facebook. Story 58. I was an angry colored kid in South Africa, caught apartheid in the transition to democracy. My Afrikaans teacher in grade 8 was a white guy, and in the first week of his class, we had to write a 1-page story about anything we wanted. I wrote the most politically charged thing I could. It wasn't great, but for a 14-year-old railing against everything, it was everything I had. Anyway, he grades the stories for the class and hands them back, all except mine. He calls me out of the classroom and hands me my writing. I got a good grade for it, but I don't recall what it was. What I do remember is him looking me in the eye and saying, "You have a lot of talent. You know how to work with words. Don't waste it on writing crap like this. It's limiting and lazy. Push yourself to write what's real inside you." And from that point on, writing became my life. Story 59. Not a high school teacher, but the situation should count because he was the reason I changed careers and started working on myself. In 3rd and 4th year of university, we go to practice, so to say, in different companies, whether by choice or application. For context, I always had this creative side. Wanted to do cool drawings and stuff, but mom said, "Here's to future in graphic design in our country," and everyone was going for economics, so I did too. To please mom, have a stable possible future, etc. In 3rd year, I, marketing research major, went to an alcoholic beverages distributor company here. I was technically interning for Chivas Regal's brand manager and his team. I loved sitting next to their graphic designer, watching her do magic on the computer. This was back in like 2009-ish. IT here was just barely starting out. So the brand manager, dude named Karen, asked me if I know any design-related programs, since I seemed so interested in it. I remember being so ashamed to say that I didn't know jack crap. So I decided to actually work on myself, so that next time we meet, I tell him that yes, I do know programs. I can do design too. While I learned a lot from him during the 2 to 3 months I was there, it didn't really matter in the end, because I went straight into IT, interned for a year, slowly and surely became the designer I am today. I gotta say, marketing has helped a lot though. So yeah, I've been happily slaving in the design field ever since, for almost like 8-ish years now? I met him on accident 2 years ago and told him how he technically, without meaning to, motivated me into changing my career choice. He was quite glad that he helped in any way. Story 60. I know this is a very late reply, but I want to talk about this anyway. I'm a closeted gay in a Christian family having depressive episodes. I think that's what it's called in English. And during high school, I went through some other difficult stuff as well, so I started going to therapy secretly. One morning, my mother eventually found out that I'm seeing a therapist and went absolutely mad and couldn't stop yelling at me. When my first class of the day started, I was really fighting to hold back my tears, and my teacher could sense that something was off. She gave the other students a task and went outside with me. She asked me what was wrong, and I just broke down crying. I told her that I'm having depressive episodes and the way my mother reacted to me seeing a therapist. I also told her that someone from my family passed away due to cancer and that I'm closeted. After I was done, she gave me a hug and told me that she's proud of me that I managed to get out of bed because she has a depressed relative that can't get out of bed. She even wrote me a list of resources where I can seek even further help. We also made up a secret sign that I could show during class whenever I needed to go out and take a small break. We spoke for like 40 to 50 minutes. The way she actively listened and tried to help me when my own mother didn't want to, I'll never forget how kind she was to me. Due to the schools being closed thanks to the pandemic, I never got to properly say goodbye to her when I graduated, but I wrote her a letter and I hope it reached her and she got to read it. Story 61. I was a freshman in a Dutch high school and I was on my period. Well, I have a really heavy flow, so I have to change the pad every hour or two, but our lessons are 80 minutes long. Somewhere near the end of the school year, our math teacher got burned out and didn't come back for the rest of the year, so we got another teacher that was new at the school. Also important, he's male. This was, I believe, my third lesson from him, and I asked to go to the bathroom with 20 minutes of class left. I had the feeling I was leaking through, by the way, but he looked right at me, said no, and just went back to what he was doing. Now, I'm not embarrassed of my period, so I said out loud in the class, "Sir, I'm on my menstruation right now and would like to change my pad." He just said that I should have done that in between lessons. I got mad and said, "I can't hold the blood in or something." He kind of panicked and tried distracting by looking what the time was. I just stormed out of the classroom. I think my classmates were also looking at the teacher like he was crazy. When I came back, he fully ignored me and didn't speak to me before he got fired a few lessons after. Not because of this incident, but he was just generally bad at teaching, and the school received a lot of complaints from parents. You would think that after this, the school would give us better teachers, but no, we got an even worse one. Story 62. Having a pretty face won't get you very far. I legit looked like Harry Potter. I didn't even think I was pretty, but thinking I was, only given opportunities because I was pretty, hurt my feelings. I just wanted to do well, forget what was happening at home, and get help on homework. And the worst was, I had issues with staying awake at school, so I had to come in early to get extra help in my advanced math class. The teacher would always rub my back or caress my legs, so one day I had enough and told him I was uncomfortable with him doing that. He told me, quote, "I don't care, it's my word against yours, and who will they believe? The student who can't stay awake and has a crappy home life, or the teacher who's been around here for 40 plus years?" I was floored. Then he continued saying, "You're just the size of my trash can. I can promise nobody will know you've gone missing when you walk home from school." As an adult, this just disgusts me. He knew I had nobody to turn to and nobody would care. I needed him to help me. Looking back, it just crushed me. I had always done really well in school, but a lot was going on at home and it was hard to get a full night of sleep. I even started working after school, and that made it even harder to get schoolwork done and sleep enough. So I always did my work, but got about 3 hours of sleep. High school was fine, but as an adult, I'm so much happier. I have more control over who's in my life, and nobody has control over me anymore. I don't miss those days at all. Story 63. My AP biology teacher was interesting. Crazy as a loon, but incredibly insightful. She had a super thick Indian accent, but we hung on her every word cause they were so full of silly idioms like, "He jumped as if he saw a chicken coming out of cow." 15 years later, I still remember quotes like that. The one that really got me, though, was a week before the AP exam, which is scored 1 to 5 for those who don't know. She pointed to different students around the room saying, "You'll get 5, you'll get 5, and you'll get 5, trying to motivate us. Then she points to me and says, "Popio," using my full first and last name, "if you study all week, you might get a 4. Class laughs. One kid pipes up, "Mrs. Gupta, why won't he get a 5? She snaps back, "Oh, he's not smart enough." So I studied all week and sure enough, I got a 5. First day of senior year, I went to talk to her and brag about my 5. She said she knew already. "You're a smart boy. You're just very lazy and needed the right motivation," she told me. She was right. And no other teacher had ever called me out so perfectly and actually succeeded at motivating me. Sadly, she died from cancer the next year. None of us knew it was why she took multiple extended leaves. I wish I could go back and tell her that I still remember what she taught me. Not the biology, I've long since forgotten most of that, but I remember how she taught and cared for each of us as individuals on a level I've never experienced before or since. I'm now in education and I strive to be like her. Story 64. Dream big dreams. Had a coach and science teacher who was known for always telling his students. He had a huge banner with that written on it. He was a former captain in the U.S. Navy and was a pretty widely respected fighter pilot back in the day. He had a way of saying, not just as a cliche, but really as a challenge. He always got a ton of pride out of seeing his students succeed and get the most out of our potential. Another cool thing about this teacher, he's known to follow up and stay committed to his students. About 6 to 7 years after I graduated high school, I receive a call from a number I don't recognize. I answer, and it's him. He was thinking about former students, and I popped up in his mind and he wanted to check in. Without fail, he asked if I was still dreaming big dreams and told me how proud he was I was his student and that he was there if I ever needed anything. He's truly one of a kind. Story 65. When we had to write papers in English class, we would do something called peer editing. You would trade rough drafts with a classmate, mark up any mistakes you found with a red pen, then you'd make the suggested changes before turning in your final copy. You also had to turn in the rough draft so the teacher could see the peer edit. The kid who sat behind me was struggling a bit in English and asked me to peer edit his paper. I marked all spelling and grammar errors, then marked a couple other incomplete ideas. Things like explain why, and on another point he made, I wrote, "Great, tell me more." He then did his final copy and turned it in. When we got our papers back, he came up to me beaming because he got a B-. He said he's never gotten that good of a grade and thanked me profusely for editing his rough draft. The English teacher walked up to us both and proceeded to accuse me of writing that paper for him because, quote, there's no way he could have written that. I immediately stood up for myself and him, saying some colorful things I probably shouldn't have said. The teacher backed down, but the look of defeat on that other kid's face still haunts me. I don't know how someone could be that crappy to a kid who tried his best and just made massive improvements. Story 66. Wasn't high school, but the last day of 8th grade. My science teacher came up and hugged me, and she told me, "I love you so much. I'm so proud of you. I'll miss you so much," since I was going to high school next year. We have a very close relationship, and it meant a lot to me that she even said that, since that year was super crappy. She was also one of the only mother figures I've had that I've loved and respected. Long story short, but my actual mom is not a part of my life, and she tries to talk to me like she didn't emotionally abuse me the entire time she lived with my dad and I. Not only that, but she was the only teacher that I really felt safe around, and the only teacher who I really felt understood me. Man, I should email her sometime soon. Story 67. Not what she said to me, but what she said to my sister who was a grade below me. I hope you jump off a bridge with no water underneath. She treated my sister like crap, I think because of me. I was her teacher's assistant in the class before our yearbook period, which she was advisor of. On the last day of senior year, we were supposed to have a pizza party. She came in as I was finishing up grading her students' papers and handed me an envelope while saying, "Labicun, I don't think you contributed enough this year in yearbook, so I want you to go to the study hall next door while we have our pizza party." I was stunned. I spent the whole year involved in everything from yearbook to newspaper to announcing at sporting events. I was even the senior class president. I contributed what I could in everything. On my way out, I threw my envelope, it was a card that I didn't bother opening, at her and told her she wasted her money. I can't say it ended on a happy note. My sister passed away in 2019 from a drug overdose, so I guess this teacher got what she wanted. Story 68. Given that I was bullied quite a bit by others at the time, nothing too bad, but the kind that makes you lonely and shy. Look behind you before approaching stairs or a road, and in general, try to be as invisible as possible to make yourself as ignorable as possible. My sports teach gave me a stern talking to that I shouldn't always be so timid about everything. Be brave. You can't always be afraid. I thought about it a lot. It's a good tip. But it also absolutely communicated that I should be more like the others, which were normal, and that he didn't quite have an understanding or interest in why I was the way I was, but he did catch on enough to tell me that I needed to change. Given that I developed an anxiety complex that led into depression a few years later, due to completely unrelated reasons, I feel like I somehow failed him more than I failed myself. Story 69. This wasn't a teacher, it was the school president. My senior year, there was a mini student-teacher conference held about something. I don't remember what. And afterward, I had a quick question. He said if anyone had questions to ask afterward, so when we were all dismissed, I tagged him in the hallway. I asked my question, and he stood there with a kind of scrumpled frog face and just let it rip. I mean, rip. The sound took many different forms as it bounced off the walls of the hallway, echoing only the forewarning of the deadly gas chamber to follow, wafting slow and heavy. I stood there in disbelief. Also, by God, the stench. He shamelessly stood there and didn't even bat an eye, and said something, and I just didn't care at that point. I peaced out. Apparently, he farted around a lot. He was also, I'm gonna guess, narcoleptic because he would randomly fall asleep while driving us in the school bus all the time. The Boston school trip was horrifying. Story 70. When I was a junior in high school, my grandpa passed away. I was completely devastated. We were extremely close and I could not hold it together. My parents made me go back to school 2 days later. I wasn't ready. I was haggard looking and puffy. Nobody said a word to me and people avoided me like the plague, except Miss McConnell. She walked right up to me and said, "Hey, I'm so sorry to hear about your grandfather. Come to my room at lunch and tell me about him." The acknowledgement of what I was dealing with was huge for me. I desperately needed to be away from everybody to grieve, and she just let me. It also taught me how to help others who are dealing with that kind of grief. Do not ignore grief when people lose someone. Acknowledge it. It helps so much. Story 71. When realizing that I did not have a grade for an important assignment on the day that all grades were due. Look, I'm going to cut you a break. I want you to remember this when you get the chance to do it for someone else. He was a charismatic teacher, and I often found myself listening more to the way he viewed the world than the actual course content. He was sick and knew it. We didn't. He passed away the following year. Now I'm the person that adjusts and turns over large projects to the customer. I'm the last person to see the work of our installation techs. Most that have my title justify the time it takes to complete a task by trashing the work of the installer. While I coach our team on an individual basis and retrain people when I see mistakes, I never tell the office and always keep it between me and the maker of a mistake. I figure if a dying man can carry my mistake on his shoulder, I should have no problem doing the same. Someday I will die, and would be honored if I could leave behind half of his generous legacy. Story 72. It wasn't something he said, but did. Mr. Weedman, yes, it is his real name, and yes, he suffered mercilessly at the hands of many students, was his name, and he's the best teacher I've ever had. His very first year of teaching, I had the honor of being his student. He taught a global issues class during the Trump-Clinton election. Naturally, with a class name like that, we talked in depth about the election constantly. Naturally, this sounds like a horrible recipe for disaster, but the way he commanded the respect of his students, it wasn't. We had a class full of diversity, from distinguished honors students to your average kid, white and black and everything in between. Normally, that detail wouldn't be important, but given how controversially charged the election was, I think it definitely is important here. In a world where sharing your political opinion is social self-unaliving, it was amazing hearing how healthily everybody in that class debated with each other, and it was in no small part to Mr. Weedman, who mediated debates and promoted discussing the positives of what you oppose. Giving you credit where credit was due effectively eliminated any hostile tension that you would normally see when discussing Trump and Clinton, among other things. Those other things being that we just flat out respected the man. It's public education, so you generally know what to expect, but we couldn't have possibly expected him. He refused to assign homework. He asked us, what's the point of being in a global issues class if we aren't discussing global issues? So homework was absolutely a no-go. Aside from the bare minimum mandatory, it was the same for tests. He made it clear that he didn't want his class to be Common Core. He wanted honest discussion and no pointless distractions. Along with these things, he started teaching us basic, everyday, and vital things. How to write a check, tie ties, driving tips, importance of mental health, healthy diets and activity, make and update resumes, all those sorts of things. He knew that kids weren't learning the important things, and he knew that kids wanted to learn these basics. By the end of the semester, everybody basically felt like they had another dad. Me especially. He taught us important life skills and really touched many of our lives. To know that somebody truly cared about our futures, it wasn't his words, but him that I'll never forget. Story 73. I'll try to be brief. My freshman year of high school, I broke some rules, but since I wasn't caught by staff, simply ratted on by another student and then confessed, I was given a choice. I could withdraw from school or be expelled. A withdrawal simply says I chose to leave of my own volition, and I could reapply next quarter and likely be accepted back. Sadly, this was the fourth quarter of the year, but even so, I would be able to return to my friends at the start of the next year this way. If I was expelled, that goes on my record, and the reason why as well, and likely they would not accept me and my girlfriend both back. Rules would keep them from taking both of us back at the same time, so I withdrew, as did my girlfriend, I later found out. I knew I had broken the rules, I accepted the consequences, and I could see, even at 15 or so, the olive branch they were extending to a typically well-behaved kid who made a bad choice. I ended my freshman year at my grandma's house, going to school in a town of less than 200 people. My freshman class had 7 other students. Small podunk place. During that summer, the driver's ed/shop teacher sent me a letter. He was in church at the time and being a bad example by writing this letter on a bulletin instead of listening to the sermon. But I was on his mind and he thought it important to let me know. I don't recall the exact words. I might have it somewhere, but after a couple moves, I might not. But the gist was that everyone makes mistakes, chooses the wrong choice from time to time. That's part of life, and while making mistakes is part of growing up, we don't ever entirely grow out of it. But that's not the most important part. What is important is that while these mistakes may shackle us with a reputation, the mistakes and the reputation, neither one define us. We define who we are by our actions and choices after the fact. I may have made a mistake. I may regret it. I may not regret it. He didn't know, but he knew that that mistake wasn't who I am, simply something I had done. He wanted me to know that as well. To know that if I chose to come back, and he hoped I would, that I can be whomever I wish to be if I put in the work. This was a teacher whom I had for the aforementioned classes but never really liked. He was dry and a little boring and thought himself funnier than he actually was, and he took the time out of his life to write me a letter to cheer me up and encourage me. It was a huge gesture and really turned my opinion on him around. I stopped being as standoffish about him and found out he actually is funny, though still dry-humored. I really grew to appreciate him, even though he was overshadowed by other teachers there. Story 74. Middle school, and it was a sports teacher. First week into the new year, every teacher was wishing us a happy new year, and just before starting our regular PE class, we were all sitting crisscross applesauce in front of the whiteboard in the gymnasium as usual, and he told us, "I know everyone's wishing you a happy new year today, but I would like to wish you a happy new day." In life, it's easy to never take time to enjoy things and to constantly look forward to the next thing. In the morning, you're looking forward to your lunch break. In the afternoon, you're looking forward to the end of classes, so you can go back home and play video games. You spend the entire week looking forward to the weekend so you can have fun. Life is really short, and if you never take the time to appreciate the present moment, all these days will be far behind you, and you will wish you had enjoyed them more. So I wish you a happy birthday. Considering we were 13, 14, and it was coming from a sports teacher, absolutely no one took it seriously. Dumb teenagers will be dumb. I remember realizing the depth of what he had just said, and I looked around and just saw people silently laughing and cringing, or not paying attention at all. And after that, they were like, what was that? Philosophy from a sports teacher, so cringe, LMAO. But it hit me, and I still think about it from time to time. That guy knew we were dumb teenagers. He knew he was a sports teacher. He knew he didn't have the cred, and he knew most of the students would just cringe. But he still went ahead and said it, and I still remember it almost 15 years later. Story 76. My 11th grade physics teacher told the whole class when I was dropping out of high school and giving her the school book back that I'm a shiny example of a failure and soon-to-be drug user or prostitute. Don't be like her and be a useless person to society. I went back to school, but it was a reform kind of school, where I take homework home and bring it back next day, and at the end of the week I take a test. I'll talk to the teacher that's giving me the homework and ask the questions that I didn't understand. In about an hour or two, I'll go home. That teacher couldn't believe that someone who's smart and respectful could fail in regular school, but yet could easily pass all the classwork from here with no problem. She said that my high school failed me and that I can achieve great things if I put my mind to it and have the right support. Right now, I'm just a dishwasher/combo, but my boss, he always tells people and new employees that he was extremely blessed that I came to this restaurant, because I'm a hard worker and I care about everybody, that I'll do things that are not in the job description. I try to make people's jobs easier and show them that teamwork is something that I care about. My boss always tells people that he wishes more employees were like me or close to me. LOL, I don't have good memories of my teacher who believes in me, and I'm not good at remembering names, especially some 12 plus years ago, for me that is. but without her being there, I wouldn't be who I am or what I do. Story 77. I was 17 in ninth grade. That's 3 years older than you're supposed to be, I think. Repeated 7th grade and was expelled 2 quarters into ninth and was trying at it again. I had an older black math teacher who was very no-nonsense. One day, I was the first to get to class and she said, Mr. J, my greatest overachiever and my greatest underachiever. I said, what does that mean? He said, well, for example, you're not the only one who passed yesterday's test. You got 100%. But you're also the only one that didn't do a single homework assignment for the section. I said, I had a good teacher when I paid attention. He said, yes, unfortunately, the way things are weighted, you'll have no chance of success with that formula. I never saw him again. I skipped the next 2 weeks and then told my dad I was dropping out when the phone calls started coming. I misunderstood what he meant at the time and took it too personally. I wasted the next few years skateboarding, which is probably what I would have ended up doing anyways, but I started to think maybe he thought his comments were the catalyst to make me drop out. Which they were, but for the wrong reasons. He was totally right, and if I had a different paradigm of what he was trying to say, I might have snapped out of it and tried. Again, it would have changed very little about the next few years, if anything at all. Story 78. My senior year of high school, my creative writing teacher walked me down to the office, watched me sign out of school, I was allowed to, and made sure I was able to get home safely. The night before, I had found out that my best friend had died in a plane crash. I was an absolute wreck. I still tried to go to school the next day. Ditched first period, writing was second period, and I went. It was the end of the year and we were just working on our final projects, so after a brief time in class, we were free to go wherever we needed/wanted to for work. I ended up sitting near a classmate who knew me well enough to know something was wrong. She got it out of me and told the teacher. The teacher came and found me and she walked me out. She said just before I left that sometimes it was more important to take care of me and myself first, rather than to try and act like I was always okay. She said it was okay to grieve and I needed to do so or I would always regret it. It wasn't anything deeply profound or meaningful, but I needed to hear it, especially then. And the advice to take care of myself has helped me out so much over the last decade. My family had very much always been a tough it out sort of family, which had sort of mostly, sometimes occasionally worked. But it wasn't doing me any favors in a lot of ways. Story 79. I went to an upper middle class bougie high school in a really Republican neighborhood. There were pockets of blue, obviously. It was the new millennium after all. But this school was still like 98% white, and it was a large school with like 1,500 plus students. Even then, of all the students of color, you could literally count specifically the black students on a single hand. Back on topic, it was one teacher I had senior year that absolutely reamed a student for being obscenely racist. Like, he let this kid effing have it. And considering this teacher was a grad student and that was his first year teaching solo, that was a pretty big risk he took to stomp down this kid. He didn't say anything specifically to me, but that was literally the first time I'd ever seen someone, anyone really, call out someone specifically for being racist, and I think that really set me on course for being genuinely aware of things like race, that you couldn't just coast through life being colorblind and have that be good enough. Story 80. I was in JROTC in high school and skipped school a lot to work in the family business changing tires. My dad had a couple small tire shops and hired meth heads or thieves that worked for cheap, but never worked out, so I worked to help out and keep eyes on the shop I worked at. Anyway, I would come into school and ignore class unless I didn't understand the material and catch up on assignments and study in school, so I didn't have to outside of school. For JROTC, I would sit there and ignore anything we did, thinking I only need a D to pass, and for 4 years I'll get a promotion if I ever decide to enlist, so I did as little as possible and put that time towards studying or goofing off. So my Air Force retiree instructor pulls me to the side one day and says, "You're never here, and when you are here, you're still not here. Why don't you stop wasting your time and get your GED and start working full-time already? Not like you'll graduate anyway, am I right?" I took the ASVAB at school, got a 91, and he had the school make an announcement telling the whole school about it. Hated that because it got me a lot of unwanted attention and I was a loner. Not because I was weird, but because I didn't care about fake friends I don't have anymore, and needed to help take care of my siblings. He came up to me and told me he knew I was smart and he should be like him and go to college and become an officer in the Air Force, and pretended like he wanted what was in my best interest. I later on graduated, enlisted in the Navy as a nuke, and none of my JROTC time mattered because my rate gave me that free promotion anyway. Story 81. My teacher did this with all his classes each year, but he would cancel the class. He taught math and French and business, depending on the year, but he would take a day where we could have a social lesson. He told us to sound off on all the bad words we knew, and we collectively agreed it was a safe space, and I had a very diverse class, so you could say a racial slur, but it was because we were listing them off. Every bad word you could think of. Dozens. Every slur, every curse word we could think of. We wrote all the words down on the board, and then we spent the class putting them into categories of racist, homophobic, sexist, okay, which was kind of badass for a bunch of 15-year-olds, because we were debating which bad words were okay to use in everyday life. My teacher said his favorite word was chicken sucker, which he used to describe everything, but was open to debate over whether that was an appropriate word to express himself. He was also Chinese, so he had a litany of suggestions himself, and a lot of slurs I'd never heard of. Things like crap, piss, F, prick, a-hole, etc. were deemed to be words we should elect to use, if we ever needed to curse. Things like the N-word or other off-color words were not appropriate to use, ever, and neither were sexist or misogynist words. It was weird because that teacher was actually politically very conservative, but that lesson was burned in my head because it was one of the few times everyone in the room was really interested in being woke, and we could have honest discussions about language where everyone got on the same page. We'll never forget that. Story 82. This will probably get buried in the comments, but oh well. Sophomore year of high school was spent high 24/7. I was constantly stoned, but did great in all my classes, particularly my sophomore physics class. I sat right up front all the way to one side and basically didn't pay attention, yet aced every single test and basically the whole class. I even took plenty of naps in class, right in plain view of the teacher. Well, the end of the year rolls around and it's the last day of class. We had already taken our final a few days prior, and the teacher is just kind of winding down the year and giving his closing statements, if you will. Then he says something very close to this. I can't remember his exact words since this was 20 years ago. You know, I've got to say one more thing. Of all my students and all my classes, the one student who got the highest grade on the final, and really the entire class, is here in this class. And I don't know how he did it because he basically slept through the entire year. But he did it, and it's Pullfish. He literally got the highest score on the final, and all year I watched him sitting over there sleeping. Congratulations, Pullfish. Good job. I'll never forget it. It almost seems like a dream because it's so surreal. He said it right in front of the whole class. I've never felt so awesome in my entire life. Story 83. You don't have to if you don't want to. I knew what she meant. In high school, I had come out as gay. When in the changing room, I would often be subject to remarks, looks, assaults, and basically everything a new kid in school didn't want. I was also new, too. Mrs. Parker was her name. She took me into the PE office and explained that she heard what the other boys were saying, that she understood how this is a confusing time for most teens, but she wanted me to rest assured that she would defend me against the comments and looks as much as she could. For me, that held back a ton of bullying. By giving me a get-out-of-jail-free card, she honestly, I think, saved my life. I saw her once a few years ago on a night out. Even though I was drunk, I still called her Miss Parker and said, "Thank you for saving my life." Yet my friends couldn't make sense the next day as to why I'd said that. But no, for me, Mrs. Parker knew me, where I was coming from, and what was best and easiest for me. Story 84. This maybe doesn't count, but I was advanced 2 grades in math, so I was in a class with older kids. The teacher had us sit in groups of 4, and we all had assigned number seats. That seat number was also how the teacher referred to you, so I was student 14. Well, I'm shorter than the boys 2 years older than me, so I asked them if I could move. He said yes. I let him know I was now 16. Well, halfway through the year, my parents get a phone call that I'm failing math and they want me to move to take a less advanced class. Turns out, he'd been marking me absent for months. I confronted him and he told me he'd never met me. I was shocked. I wasn't a quiet kid. I had thought I had inside jokes with this teacher. Anyway, my team rallied and told him I had been there all along, but I'd never felt more insignificant than I did then. I feel like teachers are put on a pedestal of being so noble when the reality is they're just normal people working for a paycheck and us kids are just another kid in a desk. Story 85. In high school, we had to write long essays and summary of a chapter in for advanced English. I particularly enjoyed that and used to write pages of those, which eventually my English teacher would read in our class and other classes too. Everyone made fun of me for saying, "Who cares about what we write in literature? It's of no use." One day I was being teased about my essay that I wrote for our midterm, and when the teacher heard it, she said, "She feels it and writes it," shutting up everyone in the class. I still haven't forgotten her words, and it's one of the kindest and motivating things I've ever heard about myself. That particular line is also the reason I'm a part-time writer and have my work published in various print media. Story 86. My two English teachers caught my, at the time, very abusive boyfriend to go take a swing at me in the hall outside of my third-floor English class because I got a tattoo and he thought it was trashy and didn't like that I got one without his permission, and also the fact he wanted one first. Third-floor teacher, let's call her A, saw him go swing at me as I cover my head/face and cower to the wall. She grabs me tight to her, and teacher B, who was his homeroom teacher, grabbed him and pinned him to the door of another teacher's room. B: "I know I did not see you go raise a effing hand to chess." Yes, she cursed. A lot. Teacher A asks B if she's got this, and she says yes, as she radios for security to come. I'm still holding A, shaking, trying not to cry, as my favorite security guard comes running over to me. We have the male and female versions of each other's names, so we got really close. Think Eric and Erica, that kind of thing. Security guard sees me and crouches down to see if I'm okay. I shake my head, and he pats my head, and he says he's going to take care of it. He drags the boyfriend to the principal's office, and he got suspended for 3 days. Oh boy, 3 whole days. Teacher A has her assistant start class, and A and B take me into B's class, whose students were in study hall at the time. So we were alone. I sit down and start to think I'm in some sort of big trouble here, and I finally start to break down crying. Teacher B: "I don't know what the hell's going on, but there's something you're going to learn right now. Nobody has a right to raise a goddamn hand to you. Ever. I know he's been hitting you. I know he ripped your eyebrow ring out." Teacher A: "And we were waiting for you to tell us, but we were wrong, so we stepped in. You're not going to let this idiot with a complex hit you anymore. You're going to break up with him. You're going to leave him in the dust like the trash he's acting like, and you're going to move on. You're a bright girl. You've got plenty of time for boys/girls, etc. when you're out of here. We love you, and we're not going to let him hurt you anymore, okay?" And they didn't. He never raised a hand to me in school for the rest of the time I was there. They let me run to them whenever he got mouthy or too close. They were my goddamn heroes in that hellhole. Story 87. In middle school, not high school, I had just gotten glasses and decided to sit in the back of the classroom because I was nervous what people might say. First period teacher noticed and asked out loud in front of the whole class whose glasses they were because she'd never seen me wearing them before. Felt like everybody's eyes were on me. Second period teacher looked at me and then didn't say anything. I asked her at the end of class, and she told me she didn't want to bring attention to me. Years later, when I was a cashier, the second teacher came through my line. I recognized her and reminded her about it and how it meant a lot to me. She teared up a bit, that I remembered her kindness so many years later. Story 88. Usually just petty stuff is what I remember, but right now what I can think of is during my first day of college, a teacher told us something along the lines of, in elementary school, teacher does 90% of the work. The student does the remaining 10% in the form of homework, research, etc., and all leading to a point where in college, the teacher was responsible of only 10% and the student had to do the remaining 90%. At the end of the day, most of my teachers in college seemed to think the same, even worse. There were some teachers that didn't move a finger and the class was just 100% presentations from the students. I don't understand what's the hypothetical reasoning for this, but in my experience and with the school system we have in Mexico, it didn't really work, and I never agreed with that being the way things should be, but they were. I feel like it should be exactly the opposite. When you're a kid, you, or most of the kids, have a huge curiosity about wanting to learn and understand everything that surrounds them. I think this should be taken advantage of, and teachers should be more like guides that lead kids to learn the stuff they need to learn in a way that results in interesting, attractive, fun, like a game. Not saying that kids should do whatever they want, but at least here in Mexico, we meet our first years of school in a way that learning becomes an obligation, something difficult, boring, scary, where you can't or shouldn't speak in class. You shouldn't deviate from what the program says, and the teacher is the ultimate authority and is always right. Thus, a lot of people grow up hating school and by consequence, hating learning/studying. History is boring. Math is too hard, so don't waste time trying to understand it later in life, etc. Again, here in Mexico, college is basically, or at least in my experience, I'm an engineer, students have to research everything. Most classes are just student presentations, and then you're thrown into the real life to get real jobs that affect real people with skills that in the end you learn by yourself. I think that's not only ineffective, but also dangerous. This is when I think teachers should be extra careful about what they teach. They're supposedly teaching you skills that you're going to put to use in an actual job with actual clients in real companies. They should teach you every single possible situation/scenario you're going to face in your field, the explanation/theory about why they happen, and the proper specific way to solve it, how to identify an issue, etc. I don't know how crazy or wrong I am, but I know that I'm working and encounter so many stuff that I never learned in school. So that I see other people and their jobs just being awful. I think about how useless college really is, and I remember what that teacher once told us. I ignore if for other careers is different, but I wouldn't have that much hope. Story 89. My high school drama teacher told me that I was only good for my singing voice. I hadn't ever acted before and was only in choir, so I was extremely nervous and insecure on stage. He made it so I didn't act for almost another decade. I turned out to be decent at it and frequently starred in a lot of community theater productions that he later attended. It would have felt good, but he always pretended not to know me. Looking back, it was a really cruel thing to do to a child who needed encouragement rather than degradation. I also had an English teacher tell me that, quote, only smart people applied to the college I applied to. I ended up getting into that college. She'd always hated me. I actually did get some measure of retribution when she ended up on probation a few years later. I was her probation officer. She wasn't on my caseload, but I ran into her at the office a few times. Story 90. Navy/Iraq war vet teacher starts crying in front of her class of 14 to 15-year-old students because she remembered how afraid she was of seeing her students get hurt. Also brings Freezy Pops and candy canes to class. Got married to a guy she met on a dating profile her students made for her. I could go on and on and on about Mrs. Wiles. She was my freshman teacher during last period. I don't remember exactly what her class was called. It might have been Global Studies, but she always said that she taught it like social studies because there's always a social element to history. That's not what stood out to me, though. Mrs. Wiles was in the Navy. Her exact rank I forget, but I remember her Navy stories a lot. She would tell us them when there was free time in class. You know, on my first day on the job, there was a fire in the room next to the explosives, and my boss looked at me and told me to figure it out, was one of them. Another was, I felt bad when my friend asked me to wear my uniform to his retirement party because I outranked him and didn't want to look like I was hogging the spotlight. She wasn't just in the Navy, though. She also fought in Afghanistan. Her story is infamous in our school. She got a call during one of her classes and had to stop everyone and tell them, I have to be out on the next flight to Bangladesh, and the principal came and took over the class. But there's one story she told us in class. Just writing that sentence, this one story, was enough to make my eyes watery just remembering it. You know, when your teacher is a veteran, obviously some kid will ask, have you killed anybody? She wasn't afraid to say that she'd held a gun, and while she was vague, she came across as saying she'd kill people during her service. But that didn't put her over the edge in her class. No. Someone asked what started the war in Iraq, and she started to explain to us her experience in Afghanistan. These kids, I'd ask them what they were fighting for. They'd say to take revenge for 9/11, and I'd just walk away. I didn't want to argue. And she'd tell us about these young soldiers she worked with. Most of them were only there to pay to go to college. She'd be honest with us. Most of them didn't know what the war was about, and most of them wouldn't believe her if she told them. But they were wrong. Fresh out of high school, some of them. And she started to get quiet when she told us about one of her jobs. Some mornings, she had to do the paperwork for all the people who had died overnight. And that was when the classroom collectively went silent. Because our Navy, Iraq war veteran teacher, who would shout to get the room's attention and scoff at students who wore expensive clothing, the $20 sock story is one for another time, sniffled, and her eyes glazed over with tears, and she smiled at us. You know, every single day I was terrified when I did that paperwork, because I was so afraid that I was going to see one of my students' faces on the list of those who died in that senseless war. I don't know what I'd do if I ever saw one of your faces on the list of those that didn't make it. It's been a few years, so these words aren't exact, but that's how I remember it. She lifted her hand to her face and she wiped her eyes, laughing. She did that a lot. She would laugh when she got emotional. I respected her a lot before then. She was kind of the sort of teacher you either really loved or really hated. But in that split second, watching her stand at the front of the room in front of all of us, telling us that the scariest experience for her was being afraid of seeing one of her students die, I think even the most stubborn and stuck-up students saw that, holy crap, she cares a lot about us. Also, she was just a great teacher in general. One day it was really warm and she brought a box of half-melted, they call them Otter Pops, but out here they're Freezy Pops, into the classroom and told us to take a bunch as long as we didn't tell the other classes because she could only convince the cafeteria to hold one box in the freezer. And the day before winter break, she dumped a load of mini candy canes out and told us to take as many as we could. She also got married at the school because her students insisted they set up a dating profile for her, and she ended up falling in love with the guy she met because of it. I have a lot more stories of hers that stuck with me if you guys are interested. Story 91. If you don't know the answer, don't leave it blank. Put down, I don't know. What am I going to do? Tell you you're wrong? He explained that if enough people didn't know, then it helped him teach that thing with either more emphasis or drop the question because it may not be that important. He would actually grade your test as if that question didn't exist. 20-question test with 1 IDK became a 19-question test. That put more weight on the other questions. More than 25% IDK from the class made it a bonus question. More than 10% IDK from a single student dropped your grade 1 full letter. 20-question test with 2 IDK gave you an 18-question test. 18 out of 18 would be 100% and an A+, but would lose a letter grade, unless one or both of those questions became a bonus question. I once had a 20-question test with 7 IDK, got an A+. Some of the questions I answered were bonus questions. The grading was a wild ride. I was best in class, probably because I read the books aside from the lectures. I always felt like I didn't know anything. Story 92. He didn't really say it to me, but it still meant a lot to me. In 7th grade, I took a shop class. I was one of only 3 girls in the entire class. One day, one of the boys decided it would be funny to walk up behind me and slap my ass. Without thinking, I immediately turned and punched him as hard as I could in the shoulder. Admittedly, as hard as I could wasn't particularly hard, but it still caught him off guard. Of course, the kid immediately went crying to our teacher, Mr. D, about how I had hit him. Mr. D just sort of stared at the kid for a moment and said, "Yes, I know, I saw her hit you. I also saw why she hit you. Let's talk about why your behavior is a problem." He then explained to the kid, clearly and patiently, about consent, bodily autonomy, and assault. The kid never bothered me again, but more importantly to my mind, I never heard about him bothering any other girls again either. Mr. D saw a chance to truly correct the kid's behavior, not just punish it. In that moment, he also reassured me, without even addressing me directly, that I had a place in his class along with everyone else, and that he respected me as a person and took my safety, and the safety of the rest of the students, seriously.